So if you draw a vertical line and it intersects more than one point on the graph, it's not a function. If we had a circle, would that be a function? Anyone? No, exactly. It's not a function because I can draw several vertical lines and it will hit more than one spot. This is a cubic function, and it's a function, fortunately I said it already, because when I draw my vertical lines, I can only hit one spot. Would this one be a function? There are some lines I can draw and only hit one spot, but you only need one line, and if it hits more than one spot, then it's not a function. Any questions on that part? Has the tutor arrived from the business school? Okay. Besides looking at the graph, you could also have points. Remember, when you're given a point, your x values first and then the y. So if we had 2, 3, 5, 7, 6, 3. When you're looking at a set of points and you want to decide if it's a function or not, what you're looking for is if the x value repeats, because each time you have an x value, you only want one y value. And notice the x values 2, 5, 6, and 9 do not repeat. So this would be a function. Any questions? Even though the y repeated, it doesn't matter if y repeats to be a function. It's only the x. So if we had this. This one is not a function because the x's repeat. Any questions so far? Another way they show it is a table. I guess we could use the table I have in the picture. We look at this table. Notice that, well, will it be a function? Notice the x values do not repeat. So it's not a, so it is a function. Doesn't matter if the y's repeat, although these don't, but as long as the x's do not repeat. Let's look at one that would be. If we look at this one, is it a function? Anyone? So no, it's not a function. Why is it not a function? Does anyone want to say? Yes. It's not a function because the two x values repeat. It has nothing to do with all the fives. That's fine. But because this was a 1 and a 1, oh, since it's the same value, it should be okay though. This one would be okay because they're the exact same point. But if we made this a -5, then it would not be. I didn't think about that. Because the 1 has to give two different y values. So the way it was to begin with when this was a +5, it's a function because we're just rewrote a point. But by making it a -5, it's not a function. So be careful of that. When it was positive, then it still would have been a function. It's kind of a trick question. I didn't think of that at first. So when it was a +5, it would just be writing the same point twice. But as soon as you make it a different number, then it's not a function. The reason it's not a function is because for x equals 1, the y value can be 5 or -5. So there's two different values. Any questions on that? Another way or spot where they check for a function, it's called a scatter plot. A scatter plot is when you mark the points on a graph, but you don't connect the lines. So if we had a point here, no, when you have these points to check if it's a function, you can use that vertical line test. Notice when we draw a vertical line at each one of the points, we're only hitting one point. So this would be a function. Now, as soon as you put 2 points above each other, say I put one here, now it makes it not a function because I'm hitting 2 spots. So when you have a scatter plot, you can check for a function, and it's as long as you draw a vertical line at each one of the points, you shouldn't hit more than one. If you hit more than one, then it's not a function. Any questions on that? Has the tutor from the College of Business come yet? Okay, I think they forgot. Any questions on the functions? I think that's all the ways. Yes, the 1 is repeated. Now, when it repeats, though, it has to repeat to 2 different y values. They can't be the same value. Any questions? So if we look at the problems I have here, number one, let me write the chart over here so I can write on it. If you don't want to write these questions out, I will post this on As You Learn with the recording. That way you have it. Okay. Well, we know this is a function because I said it was a function. Y is a function of X. Now, when they're using that terminology, you can kind of look at the equation. Y is a function of X. That helps you explain it. And so for each X value, you get a Y value, which means this is independent variable. And this is the dependent variable, Y is, because it depends on X. Table shown at the right gives Y as a function of X. Use the table to answer the parts. So A, is 6 an input or an output? An input would be your independent variable. The output is dependent because it depends on the input. So would -6 be an input or an output? Anyone?
But
Input. Because it's an X value. About f of -6, would it be an input or an output? When it's written like this is a Y value. So you want to remember f of any value, that gives you your Y values. And the Y values are the outputs. Oh, someone typed it in, I guess. State the domain and range. When you're stating the domain and range, you're listing the values. And when you list them, you put them into a script, parenthesis, and then you just list each one with a parenthesis, with a comma. Sometimes the MyLabs would say, or yeah, we use MyLab, to put them in increasing order. As long as they're all there, I'm not worried about it. Also, if any repeat, well, of course, X should not repeat, but if any of the Y values repeat, you only need to show it once. So if we had 2 4s here, when we list the range, we'd only show one of them. So our domain, it's all your X values. -6, -2, 0, 1, 4, 12, and 15. And this is called a set. The range would be the Y values. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8. I put them in increasing order on a test. As long as I have them all there, I'm fine with that. And remember, don't repeat. So if there was more than one of the same, you only show the one. Explain why this relationship describes y as a function of x. Forget what they want for that. For each x, when we plug it into whatever equation we have, we're going to get the y value. And so that's why it's a function of x. So for each x value, there is only one y value that is output. Any questions on that? Okay. F of -6. When you're asked to find the value, remember the value in here is x. So when we plug x in, we want to know what the y value is. So what would f of -6 be? When x is -6, exactly, y is 4. So f of a value is the same as listing your y value. You want to kind of remember that y and f of x are interchangeable. They mean the same thing. What is f of 0? Anyone? F of 0 is, yes, 8. So we look where x is 0, y is 8. Well, this one, we want to find x when f of x is 3. Anyone? Yeah, exactly. It's number 1. You're working backwards. Remember, f of x, this is the same as y. So we're saying when y is 3, what's x? And it's a 1. So it's working backwards. Any questions on that part? H. Same, find x when f of x is 0. How about the last one?
Or
Yeah, 4. So when y is 0, x is 4. Three, 1. Any questions on this group of problems? Number 2, we're given the function y equals f of x plus 2 over x minus 5. And we want to find some functions. Now, instead of a chart, sometimes you're given an equation, and when you're given an equation, you just plug those values in. So for f of 4, we would just plug 4 into the equation wherever there's an x. So if we plug in the 4, then we have 4 plus 2 is 6, and 4 minus 5 is a negative 1. 6 divided by negative 1 is a negative 6. Any questions on that part? Okay, go ahead and find f of 0, f of negative 2, and f of 5. So for the first one, f of 0, does anyone want to say what they got?
2 over negative 5.
Exactly. When we plug in 0, we get 2 over negative 5. Now, when you have a negative in a fraction with one number on top and bottom, the negative can be in the bottom, it can be out front, or it can be in the top. All three are correct answers. Any questions on that one? And how about f of negative 2? Anyone want to say? 0, exactly. So when we plug in negative 2, we get 0 on the top and a negative 7 on the bottom. 0 divided by a negative 7 is 0. Any questions on that one? How about f of 5? Undefined, yes. You can put undefined, no solution, doesn't exist. Because what happens is we're getting a 0 in the denominator. We have 7 over 0, and you can't divide by 0. So you can say undefined, no solution, or a lot of times we'll use DNE. It just means does not exist. But any one of the three of those is fine. So you can have a 0 in the numerator, but not in the denominator. Any questions on that? When we get to limits, we will end up with some things that will have 0 over 0. And that means it wasn't reduced. So in these polynomials which are reduced, we shouldn't have a 0 over 0. But we will run into that later. Is y a function of x? When we plug in an x value, do we only get one solution? Yeah, there's no values that I can plug in and we'll get two different answers. So it is a function. Any questions on that? Number 3, a business property valued at 300,000 is depreciated over 25 years by the straight line method. So its value X years after the depreciation began is V equals 300,000 minus 1,000 X. And X is years and I believe V is depreciation. Yeah. So V is the how much it's depreciated. Or no, it's not. It's your value. Sorry, I didn't read the whole thing. So it was valued at 300 minus 1,000 X. Explain why the value of the property is a function of the number of years. Choose the correct answer below. Whenever you have x to the first power, and it also told us it was a straight line, those will be functions. The only time a straight line is not a function is a vertical line. Because if we think about a vertical line, if we use the vertical line test, it's hitting every point. So a vertical line is not a function. Every other straight line is. And when you have something that's a variable to the first power, that's linear, so it's a straight line. And that's why it's a function. Now to put it into words, we have there is more than one input for each output. That would be okay. There is one input for each output. There is one output for each input. There is more than one output. Okay, so remember the definition for a function is for every x, there's only one y. And x is an input. So for every input, there's only one output. So that would be B. There is one input for each output. One output for each input. This one. For each input, there's only one output. So it would be C. You have to be careful on this one, and I would never put this on a test, but there is one on the homework. I think the way it's all worded is a little bit tricky. But you want for each input, there's one output. Any questions on that one? The revenue from sales of mountain bobbleheads is where X is the number of bobbleheads sold. What is R of 100 and interpret it? So if we wanted to find R of 100, just like we did up here, we're going to just plug in for X. So that gives us 1200, but it's more important to know what that value means. They told us R was revenue. X was the number sold. So when 100 bobbleheads are sold, we will make a revenue of $1,200. So when it asks you to explain, make sure you're writing it in at least one. This one you can do in one sentence, but make sure it's a complete sentence. Any questions on part A? For number 3, it would be C. Because for every input, you only want one output. Yeah, I don't like the wording on that problem. Okay, any questions on A? It kind of says it. B says there's one input for each output. There's one input for each output. Yeah, the answer is C. It's not B because, I mean, in this case, it wouldn't be a problem, but there's one input for each. Oops, I touch. The problem with this part B is if these values repeated, but the top didn't, then it wouldn't have one value, but still be a function. Yeah, that's why I don't like that problem. I will try and omit that one. I may not have because I might have liked the other parts of it. So if I cannot omit it, if you miss that part of the problem, let me know and I will still give you credit for it. Because I think it's confusing. But there might be more parts that I had liked and that's why I didn't drop it. So if you miss on number 3, if you have a question like that part of it and you miss it, let me know and I'll give you credit for it. If someone started it, it won't let me delete it. Okay, B. what is the revenue from the sale of 2,500 bobbleheads? So what is the revenue from the sale of 2,500 bobbleheads? Bobbleheads is X, so we're plugging in for X. And it says to write this in functional notation. That means they want you to put the function there, R of 2,500, because that's the number of bobbleheads. So it will be 12 times 2,500, which equals 30,000. So the revenue from 2,500 bobbleheads would be $30,000. And if it says write in function notation, that's this. So they wanted R of 2,500. You probably didn't have to put this part and then equals 30,000. I think on MyLabs they actually have this and you plug it in and then equals and you plug in the answer. Any questions so far? A, B, C. If the revenue is $5,616, how many bobbleheads were sold? Notice on this one, we're looking for the number of bobbleheads, which is X, and we're given the revenue. So in this case, using our equation, we're given the revenue and we want to find X. So the 5,616 goes in for revenue. You always want to understand what your variables are standing for, and that's why it's nice to use, instead of just f of x, use a letter, R for revenue, C for cost, P for profit, so you know what it is. So this time we're solving for x. Since you're multiplying by 12, you divide by it to get rid of it. So we need to sell 468 bobbleheads. Any questions on that? Oh, there's no problem to asking a question. I know that one is like, when I wrote that problem on here to go over, I deleted it twice and then put it back. So I know number 3 is confusing. Number 5. An electric utility company determines the monthly bill by charging 85.2 cents per kilowatt hour. And later in chapters, we'll actually be finding the equation, but they're giving it to us for this section. Used plus a base charge of $25.45 per month. Thus, the monthly charge is given by the function f of w equals 0.85 w plus 25.45. So they gave us the equation where W is the number of kilowatt hours. And they told us at the beginning, this gives us our monthly bill. So the function is the monthly bill. Find f of 500 and explain what it means. So for f of 500, 500 is a W, you're just plugging it in for W. And we just plug that in our calculator. So if we used 500 kilowatt hours, the monthly bill would be $450.45. Any questions on that? This one. What is the charge if 720 kilowatt hours are used? So if we have 720 kilowatt hours, are we plugging that in for R of X? Or, oh, back on the revenue, for F of W? Or just W? So should we plug the 720 in for the W or the F of W? Anyone? Since it's kilowatt hours, we know kilowatt hours is W, so we plug it in for W. So we're looking for 720. We're plugging 720 in for W. I'm getting $637.45. So if we have 720 kilowatt hours, we will spend $637.45 in the month, or for the month. Any questions on that?